Hi everybody, it's Lauren. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about my top 10 worst books of 2017. And by this point, Christmas has already passed, so late Merry Christmas to everybody as well. This video is going to be all about the worst books that I read this year. Now, in 2017, I read 55 books, which is totally awesome and 5 over my goal. And I actually enjoyed pretty much every book I read this year, but I did have some that were just absolutely terrible, and I'm going to be talking about them in this video because honestly I really like talking about things I don't like, which makes no sense. But just to kind of get a general disclaimer out there, if you liked these books or you're still interested in reading them, then I encourage you to do so. And I'm not trying to hurt or offend anyone's feelings by, sharing my opinion. It is just my opinion, and these books just weren't for me. But if you enjoyed them, I'm really happy for you, and I'm glad that you were able to take something lovely out of all of them. And I also don't actually have any of these books anymore. I've either already gotten rid of them or given them away to someone else or borrowed them from the library, so I will be inserting pictures of the books I'm talking about on the screen so you know what they look like, but I don't have them to actually hold up. These books are not going to be in any particular order except for the last book, which is the worst book that I read, but the other 9 are just kind of arbitrarily on this list. So let's go ahead and just hop right into them. So the first book that I want to talk about is Our Brothers at the Bottom of the Sea by Jonathan David Krantz. I went into this book really excited because it was set in an amusement park and was supposed to be like a murder mystery / thriller, but ultimately I was totally let down by this book because I felt like it was so bland and so boring that I didn't remember anything after I had finished reading it. It was like it all went in one ear and out the other and nothing stuck with me. The characters were flat, the plot was predictable and boring, the writing was very average, and by the end of it I just wasn't even sure that I remembered a single thing about the book. I didn't enjoy my time with it, and overall it was just a very boring, flat read. I had a couple books that I read like this year, but this was probably the one that stuck out the most, so that's why it made this list and the others didn't. Number 9 on this list is NTR Nets Trap Volume 1 by Naoko Kodama. And this was a manga that I read this year, and I'm really glad that I read it while I was just drinking a coffee in Barnes & Noble and didn't buy it because I was so disappointed by this book. I thought that it was going to be cute and kind of be like a love story between these two girls, and I mean, I guess at surface level that's what it is, and it did have cute artwork, but mostly this book was just kind of like hentai and all about this girl like having feelings for her best friend that she's known her whole life. But the relationship was really uncomfortable. It never felt like the sex was fully consensual and that's what the entire relationship was built on. And I just was really uncomfortable with it, and I didn't know that's what it was when I picked it up. So while I do enjoy manga and I do enjoy those kind of love stories, but this was not what I had been looking for, so I won't be continuing the series, and I was pretty disappointed with this book. So I actually have 2 Alice in Wonderland fails on this list this year. I'm really picky when it comes to Alice in Wonderland retellings because Alice in Wonderland is my favorite book, and there's very few retellings or reimaginings of Lewis Carroll's original book that I actually like, and unfortunately I read 2 this year that I really didn't. The first one is Insanity by Cameron Jace, and it is the first book in the Insanity series. Now, I'm going to cut this one a little slack because it is a self-published work, and so it hasn't gone through like a professional editor and publisher, and I think that there is potential in the story. I actually liked some of the characters, I liked the concept, but first off, this book was written very amateurly. It really needed some kind of descriptive help or something. I don't know if the author is not a native English speaker, and that's part of it, but this book was very childish in its execution, and oh my gosh, like, normally I have issues where books are too slow-paced and nothing is happening, but this book was so fast-paced, everything wrapped up perfectly. Like, anytime there should have been like opposition or some kind of conflict, everything wrapped up with a neat little bow. It was easily solved within like the next paragraph. There were formatting errors in the print version that I was reading. It was just kind of a mess. So while I might continue with this series because I see hope for the story, I really hope that the second volume is not as much of a struggle to read as this one. The other Alice in Wonderland retelling that's on this list, I absolutely could not stand. And it was Queen of Hearts by Colleen Oakes, which is the first book in the Queen of Hearts saga. This is like a reimagining of the Queen of Hearts origin story, and I believe it's trying to create some sympathy for her as a villain. But I hated the world in this one. Half of the reason Alice in Wonderland is my favorite book of all time is because of Wonderland. It's so magical and fun and whimsical and silly, and this book was dark. There was no joy to Wonderland at all. It didn't even feel like Wonderland. It felt like some random other fantasy world that's just called that. It felt like all the joy of Alice in Wonderland was sucked out of this book just to make it needlessly dark and more gritty and mature. And I hated it. I didn't like it at all. I read Alice in Wonderland looking for those feelings, and they weren't in here. I didn't like any of the characters. The King of Hearts, who's our main character's father, is like mentally and physically abusive to her, and I feel like I'm supposed to sympathize with that, but I thought Dinah, the main character, was so annoying. I didn't sympathize with her, and I didn't like any of the characters, and it was very political and just violent just to be that, and so this book was a major fail for me, and I won't be continuing the series at all. Next, I want to talk about Night World by L.J. Smith, which got this beautiful, gorgeous cover update this year, and I had never read it previously. It's like a very old school classic YA novel, but oh my gosh. This is like everything I hate in a YA novel, and like half the reason that I think people stereotype young adult books is this book. There was instant love in this book. Like, this isn't even a spoiler because it literally happens in like chapter 2 that this chick falls in love with this guy. You find out he's a vampire like straight off the bat. You know this guy's a vampire. She falls in love with him in like 5 minutes, and she's like a vampire by the end of chapter 2. I can't even call that a spoiler. It happens in the very beginning of the book. And what the heck? Like, there's every magical creature you can think of in this book. There's like, it's so corny. If you're gonna read a vampire novel, at least read like a good one. Like even Twilight, which I personally like, but I know it gets a lot of like crap, that was better than this book. This book is dated and corny, and it's not good. And even though it was really pretty, now that they like gave it a new cover and everything, that could not save this in my eyes, and this book was like, it was awful. The next book I want to talk about is Killer by Sarah Shepard, and it is the 6th book in the Pretty Little Liars series. I didn't go into this book expecting it to be awesome. I kind of treat these like junk food. I know that they're not that great, but I still enjoy reading them. I'm a fan of the TV show, but the books are pretty much nothing like the television show, so that's not my issue. My issue was this book, which is number 6, felt just like rereading number 5. Literally, they were dealing with the exact same issue as they were in the 5th book, except there was like more random drama thrown in just to have new drama. I felt like the characters acted way out of character, and they became people that I loathed and could not stand in this book. I felt like I gained nothing in the overall series by reading this book, and I feel like I could have skipped book 6 and moved on to book 7, and it wouldn't have mattered at all. I had such a bad experience with this book that I don't even know if I'm going to continue the series anymore, and that's pretty bad. Next, I want to talk about Impatient with Desire, The Lost Journal of Tamsin Donner by Gabrielle Burton. This was a, I guess, kind of reimagining of the Donner Party story, and if you're not familiar, the Donner Party were a group of pioneers that set off to go west. They ended up trying to take this shortcut and got stuck in the mountains during the winter, and even though there's no concrete evidence for it, it's pretty much assumed that they resorted to cannibalism to survive, and even then most of them died. Tamsin Donner was the mother of the Donner Party, so this is kind of like a reimagining of her journal, and I had expected to go into it learning more about you know, the westward expansion, life as a pioneer, the Donner Party. I got none of that out of this book. This book was mostly just diary-styled entries of whining, Tamsin being like, I didn't want to do this, why am I here, my life sucks, we're starving. You didn't even get any of the like cannibalism aspects. Not that I was particularly looking for that, but I mean, everything I went into this book hoping for was not there. It was just a whiny diary, and I gained nothing from it, so I have to call it one of the worst books I read this year. Alright, I have 3 left. So the next book I was kind of torn on whether I wanted to include it in this video or not, but I decided to because it is one of the worst books I read this year, and it is Human Biological Variation by James Michael, I think it's pronounced. This was a textbook I had to read for my human variation class, which was an intro class on the subject, and first off, I really didn't like my professor because they didn't teach, they didn't lecture, and I kind of was forced to rely on the textbook in order to understand and pass the class. However, the textbook was terrible and not a good resource at all. So if you have to use this in your class, I'm really, really sorry. This book was supposed to be an introductory text, but it basically didn't cover any of the basics. It assumed that you already magically knew all of them. The author of the book thought that the best way to teach the material was through really, really confusing graphs as well as case studies to demonstrate the points, but they haven't taught you what those points are yet. You're just supposed to magically learn them from these case studies. Now maybe some people can learn through that, but I found the text to be really convoluted and confusing. I really, really struggled in the class because I needed to rely on the text and self-teach myself, and I am someone that actually does read my textbooks thoroughly. I read this entire thing. I always read all my textbooks, and I hated this. It was so terrible and not a good resource for the class. So I just, not good. The next book I want to talk about is Queen of Someday by Sherry D. Ficklin, which is the first book in the Stolen Throne or Empire series. I can't remember. This book was terrible. This is another reason and another one of those books that is why people have stereotypes and cliches within young adult. This was a, I guess, historical fiction retelling of Empress Catherine of Russia, but when she's a young girl, it follows her when she's still Sophie and before she comes to Russia in order to take her place as Empress, and it was awful. This book was awful. Sophie was supposed to be the strong character. She can use weapons, she can defend herself, she rides horseback like a man, but that's all very superficial. Really, she's this whiny, annoying character that falls in love with 3 different guys over the course of this really tiny book. It was so annoying. She does something at the end of the book. I won't spoil it in case you want to read it, but I was so disappointed in her actions at the end of the book. I thought they were so sketchy and so shady, and I absolutely hated the writing. Also, the way that this book was formatted, because I read the print version, at the end of every chapter there was like a QR code you could scan with your iPhone in order to like take you to the site to learn more about the actual history of the book, and I hated that. I felt like that disrupted my reading experience and it made the book feel so cheesy, and it was already cheesy and really poorly written, and the characters were all terrible people, but not in that like so bad it's good to read way, just the bad way. So this book was a total fail, and I absolutely could not stand it. It was just not good. So now we're on to my least favorite book of 2017, and straight up, this is not only my least favorite book of 2017, I think this may be one of my least favorite books of all time. It is very rare when I can say that I hated a book, but I hated this book so much, and it is Sublime by Christina Lauren. I'm going to go ahead and say that in order to fully convey my hatred for this book, I'm probably going to end up spoiling the ending, so if you're planning on reading this or you don't want to know spoilers, then go ahead and just like fast forward until you don't see the book on your screen anymore, because I need to get this out before 2017 is over. I need to get my feelings for this book out. So you have been warned. There will be spoilers coming up. This book follows a ghost girl named Lucy who wakes up at this kind of boarding school academy, and she has no recollection of why she's there. All she knows is that the only person who can see her for what she truly is this boy named Colin, who's kind of a rebellious, adrenaline rushy, junkie kind of guy. And Colin becomes completely like obsessed with her. He and Lucy begin this weird ghost relationship, and there are actual ghost sex scenes in this book, which made me really uncomfortable. It was really weird. And then Colin figures out on accident that when he's near death, he can physically touch her. So he decides that the best way to go about this situation is to get his friend to help him get in a near-death experience and monitor him so he can have actual sex with Lucy in this like limbo world. I'm not making this up, I promise. This is crazy. It gets better. So then everyone else can see that Lucy's kind of like monstrous looking. He doesn't see that. He doesn't believe them. And at the end of the book, you figure out that she's kind of like a leech, and she's like leeching his life force away. And so she at least feels bad about this and tries to leave. And what does Colin decide to do? He decides that he's going to kill himself to be with her forever. At least that's how I interpreted it. But I felt like this book glorified and romanticized suicide. That is so wrong. The sex scenes were really disturbing. On top of all of that, the book was written so poorly. Christina Lauren is a pen name for these two authors that write together, and you could really tell who was writing whose perspective, because one was at least mediocre and the other was terrible, but I hated reading both of the perspectives. The writing was very, very bland. The characters were bland, everything was bland. I felt like the book really promoted bad concepts and bad ideas, and it was overall really disturbing. I absolutely hated this book. I'm not quite sure, after knowing how it ends, how anyone could really like it. It wasn't a good paranormal romance. It wasn't a good mystery. I kept reading hoping I'd find out something good, and it just never happened. It just got worse and worse and worse. So this book is officially on my hate list, which is really, really short, but it made it on there. And it is probably the worst book I read this year, and one of the worst ones I've ever read in my life. But yeah, those are the 10 worst books I read this year. I would love to know your opinions on them if you've read any of these books. Did you like them? Did you hate them? What's something that you read this year that you absolutely couldn't stand? I would love to know. I will be posting very, very soon my top 10 best books of 2017, so when I get that posted, I'll link it down below. So yeah, oh, hold on. My cat is bumping my tripod. Say hi, baby! This is my Felix. Isn't he cute? He's my reading buddy. You go lay down. You need to no! Oh, a mess, Felix. You messed it up. You messed up my outro, dog. You did. And yeah, that wraps up my worst books of 2017. I didn't go into any of these books hoping to hate them, but sometimes that just happens, and I'm sure it will happen in 2018 as well. I hope you're all doing fabulous. I can't wait to see you all in my next video, and I love you all very much and hope you're having a great day. Bye! Mwah.